The Miracle Protocol. The suppressed mental technology that rewires reality without force, struggle, or permission. Introduction. The transmission begins. This is not a book about hope. Hope is what you reach for when you don't understand the machine. Hope is what the mass mind sells you to keep you passive, patient, and perpetually waiting for a change that never quite arrives. Hope is the consolation prize handed to people who were never taught how the system actually works. This book is about mechanics. Specifically, the mechanics of a mental technology so precise, so operationally dangerous to existing power structures, that for nearly a century it was deliberately buried, not banned, not burned, but buried far more effectively in the one place most people would never look, the dusty shelves of the occult section, dismissed as fantasy for the weak-minded, labeled as New Age nonsense to ensure that serious, logical, ambitious people would never give it a second glance. It worked. For 100 years, it worked perfectly. And while the technology sat unexamined, the people it could have liberated kept doing what they were trained to do. They hustled harder. They strategized longer. They forced outcomes with increasing desperation and decreasing results. They accepted that struggle was natural, that life was a battle, that the gap between where they were and where they wanted to be was a matter of insufficient effort. They were wrong, and they were wrong in a way that the right information fixes permanently. In 1925, a woman named Florence Scovel Shinn published a small, unpretentious book in New York City that triggered a quiet panic among the establishment of her time. Not because it was religious, not because it was radical in any political sense, because it was mechanical. Shinn had not written a spiritual memoir or a philosophical treatise. She had mapped the operating system of reality itself, described the precise architecture of the human mind, identified the exact point of failure in most people's lives, and provided specific operational protocols for bypassing that failure and initiating what she called spontaneous shifts in physical reality. No intermediary required, no institution needed, no permission from the ruling class necessary. If an individual could create miracles through the precise application of their own mind, they no longer needed the bank, the authority, the hierarchy, the gatekeeper in any form. That was the threat, and the response to that threat was immediate, coordinated, and extraordinarily effective. The technology was buried. This book unearths it. What follows is not a passive reading experience. It is a transmission, a structured, sequential transfer of operational knowledge that only produces results when applied, not merely understood. Each chapter removes one layer of the programming that is currently blocking the mechanism. Each chapter provides the next piece of the operational blueprint. By the final chapter, you will have the complete protocol, not as a concept to admire, but as a tool to deploy. One instruction before you begin. Your intellect will resist this material, not because the intellect is evil, but because it was built for a different purpose, survival, not miracles. It will look for reasons to dismiss what it cannot immediately verify. It will label ideas as irrational before testing them. It will protect the programming it already has by attacking the programming trying to replace it. Expect that resistance. Don't fight it. You'll understand why fighting is exactly the wrong move by Chapter 5. For now, simply read. Let the architecture of the machine become clear before you decide what to do with it. The transmission begins. Chapter 1. The Buried Blueprint. They couldn't burn it. In an era when governments banned books, when institutions buried inconvenient ideas, when the establishment had every mechanism of censorship available, they could not make this one disappear through force. The book was already in circulation. The ideas were already loose. A direct assault would only amplify the attention. So they did something far more effective. They laughed at it. They pushed it into the shadows of the occult, that particular intellectual graveyard where serious people are culturally conditioned to never look twice. They surrounded it with crystal healers and astrology charts and the full apparatus of what the logical mind reflexively rejects. They labeled it New Age nonsense, fantasy for the credulous, dangerous comfort for people too weak to face reality. And within a generation, serious, ambitious, intelligent people had been successfully inoculated against it. Not by evidence, by association. That strategy, discrediting through categorization rather than through argument, is one of the most elegant suppression tools ever deployed. You don't need to disprove an idea. You just need to ensure that the kind of person who would act on it is not the kind of person anyone respectable wants to be. It worked for nearly a century. This chapter is about why. Florence Scovel Shinn was not a mystic in the way the word is typically used. She was not asking anyone to abandon reason, surrender logic, or believe in things that defied examination. She was an artist, a teacher, and an extraordinarily precise observer of how the human mind creates the circumstances of a human life. What she had written, what the small, unpretentious book contained, was not religion. It was not philosophy in the abstract sense. It was a manual for the mechanics of reality. Shinn's central proposition was simple enough to state and radical enough to change everything once understood. The external circumstances of your life are not happening to you. They are being produced by you, specifically by the dominant mental and emotional frequency you are broadcasting, largely without awareness, through the untrained machinery of your own mind. Your financial situation, your health, your relationships, your recurring problems, your persistent limitations. None of these are independent external realities that you are bravely navigating. They are outputs. They are the faithful, precise, merciless results of a system running exactly the program it was given. The reason this was dangerous, genuinely, systemically dangerous to existing power structures, is what that proposition implies. If your reality is the output of your internal programming, then changing your reality does not require permission, resources, connections, or institutional access. It requires reprogramming. And reprogramming is something an individual can do alone, quietly, without anyone's approval. That removes the middleman entirely. No bank needed, no hierarchy to navigate, no gatekeeper whose favor must be cultivated. The individual becomes entirely self-sufficient at the level of reality creation, which makes them immune to the most fundamental control mechanism available, control over what they believe is possible for them. The establishment understood this immediately. The technology had to disappear. Before it disappeared, Shinn had time to teach, and what she taught, distilled from decades of working directly with people in genuine crisis, genuine poverty, genuine desperation, was not a system of wishful thinking. It was a diagnostic framework. She observed, across hundreds of cases, that the people who remained trapped in cycles of lack, illness, and broken relationships shared a specific operational pattern. Not a character flaw, not moral weakness, a mechanical error. They were using the wrong parts of their mind for the wrong tasks, at exactly the wrong frequency, with the wrong level of force, and producing predictable, repeatable catastrophe as a result. She also observed that the pattern was correctable, not through years of therapy or decades of gradual improvement, through a specific, learnable series of mental operations applied with precision and consistency. She called the results of those operations miracles, not because they were supernatural, because they appeared that way to a mind conditioned to expect struggle as the only available mechanism of change. From inside the mass mind, inside the collective programming of fear, limitation, and scarcity that runs as background noise in virtually every human being, a problem resolving without force looks impossible. It looks like luck. It looks like divine intervention or fortunate coincidence. From outside the mass mind, from the position of someone who understands the machine and operates it correctly, it looks like exactly what it is. Engineering. Here is the first thing you need to understand about the world you are currently living in. The struggle is not natural. This requires more than intellectual agreement. It requires the kind of deep examination that most people avoid because the alternative, that struggle is manufactured, that it is a programmed response rather than an objective condition, carries implications that are profoundly uncomfortable. If struggle is manufactured, then everything you have been working so hard to overcome was never the real obstacle. The real obstacle was the frequency at which you were working. The real obstacle was the tool you were using, not the problem you were applying it to. The real obstacle was internal, invisible, and running continuously underneath every external effort. That is uncomfortable because it means the answers were never where you were looking for them. It is also clarifying, because if the obstacle is internal and the obstacle was installed, programmed into you by a culture that benefits from your limitation, then it can be uninstalled. Not gradually, not through decades of incremental improvement, through understanding the machine well enough to run it correctly. The mass mind is the term Shin used for the collective broadcast of human fear, the shared frequency of limitation, competition, and scarcity that most people absorb so completely, so early in life, that they mistake it for reality rather than programming. It operates on one primary channel. Life is a battle. You are told, from the earliest age, that resources are limited and must be competed for, that success requires suffering, that the appropriate response to a problem is force, more effort, more strategy, more pressure applied against the external obstacle until it yields or you break. This programming is so pervasive, so universally reinforced by media, by culture, by the well-meaning advice of people who are themselves fully infected, that questioning it feels like questioning gravity. It feels like denying reality. That feeling is the programming working exactly as designed. Because as long as you believe that struggle is the natural mechanism of achievement, you will keep applying the tool that produces more struggle. You will interpret every failure as a signal to try harder, push further, force more aggressively, which deepens the frequency of fear, which tightens the grip of the very limitations you are trying to escape. The cycle is self-sealing. The more sincerely you engage with it, the more completely it contains you. Shin saw this clearly. She saw it in case after case. Genuinely capable, genuinely motivated, genuinely hard-working people producing the same results year after year because the tool they were using guaranteed those results. Not despite their effort, because of it. She called the friction generated by force-based thinking the exact cement that holds problems in place. Think about the architecture of your own suffering for a moment. When a real crisis hits, financial collapse, unexpected debt, a situation genuinely out of your control, what is your immediate internal response? Your intellect demands action. Your logic insists on strategy. You stay awake calculating variables you cannot control, agonizing over outcomes you cannot force, building and rebuilding mental models of how to fight your way through a situation that your fighting is making worse. The hierarchy calls this being responsible. Shin called it spiritual sabotage. Not because thinking is wrong, because fear-saturated thinking applied as force against a problem tells the operating system of your mind one very specific, very clear thing. This problem is real, permanent, and requires maximum resistance. And the operating system, faithful, precise, entirely without judgment, responds accordingly. This chapter ends with one question, not a rhetorical one, a diagnostic one. Where in your life have you been applying maximum effort, sustained force, and genuine commitment, year after year, and moving backward, or standing still, or cycling through the same set of limitations with different labels? That is not a failure of character. That is not evidence of insufficient drive. That is a machine running the wrong program. The program can be changed. That is what this book is for. In the next chapter, you will understand exactly how the mass mind infection was installed, how fear became the default operating frequency for nearly every human being on the planet, and why understanding the installation process is the first step toward the uninstallation. The buried blueprint is open. Let's read it. In the next chapter, you'll confront the single most important question in this entire book. Whose voice is actually running your internal dialogue? Because if the fear-based narrative in your head isn't yours, if it was handed to you, installed in you, reinforced by a system that profits from your limitation, then you are not fighting your nature. You are fighting someone else's programming. And that is a completely different problem with a completely different solution. Chapter 2. The Mass Mind Infection. Whose voice is that? The one that tells you money is hard to come by. The one that warns you not to get too comfortable because something will go wrong. The one that reminds you, quietly but persistently, that people like you don't get to have things that easy. The one that appears the moment an opportunity presents itself and immediately begins cataloging every reason it won't work. That voice feels like yours. It speaks in your tone, in your rhythm, in the first person. It knows your history. It references your specific failures, your particular fears, your personal catalog of evidence for why limitation is the realistic expectation. But here is the question that changes everything. When did you choose it? Not adopt it passively. Not absorb it through years of cultural immersion. Choose it. Sit down with a blank internal slate and deliberately select the belief that struggle is natural, that resources are scarce, that the appropriate emotional frequency for navigating daily life is low-grade, chronic fear. You didn't. Nobody does. That is the infection. The mass mind is not a conspiracy in the dramatic sense. It does not require a shadowy council of controllers meeting in secret to coordinate the fear broadcast. It is far more elegant and far more durable than any conspiracy could be because it is self-replicating. It spreads from person to person the way all transmitted beliefs spread, through repetition, authority, emotional intensity, and the overwhelming social pressure to accept as real what everyone around you accepts as real. Your parents did not install fear-based programming in you because they were malicious. They installed it because they were themselves fully infected, because the fear they transmitted was the only reality they knew, the only tool they had been given, the framework they had received from their own parents who received it from theirs. The mass mind has been broadcasting on the same frequency for generations, not because it is true, because it is self-perpetuating. Here is the mechanics of how it works. From birth, the human mind is in a state of extraordinary receptivity. The critical faculty, the part of the mind that evaluates incoming information and decides whether to accept or reject it, is not yet developed. A young child cannot filter, cannot cross-reference, cannot ask for evidence or weigh a belief against alternative interpretations. Everything goes in, and what goes in first goes in deepest. The beliefs absorbed in early life do not sit at the surface of consciousness where they can be examined and debated. They sink into the subconscious, into the power plant of the machine, where they become the structural foundation of the entire operating system. They become the lens through which every subsequent experience is interpreted. This means that by the time most people are old enough to question their beliefs about money, capability, deserving, and possibility, those beliefs have already been installed at a level below conscious access. They are not ideas held in the mind. They are the architecture of the mind. They shape perception so completely that they are invisible from the inside. A person running deep scarcity programming does not experience it as programming. They experience it as reality. They look at the world and see genuine evidence of limitation everywhere, because the subconscious, faithful servant that it is, will always find confirmation for whatever it has been told is true. It filters incoming information to match its existing model. Evidence that confirms the programming is amplified. Evidence that contradicts it is dismissed, minimized, or simply not seen. This is not weakness. This is how all minds work, trained or untrained, infected or clear. The difference is simply what the program says. Shin called the mass mind's primary frequency fear. But fear in this context is not only the acute terror of immediate danger. It is the broader, subtler, chronic frequency that most people mistake for pragmatism. It is the low-level anxiety that treats every moment of stability as temporary. The reflexive skepticism that meets good news with quiet waiting for the catch. The deep-seated belief that abundance is suspicious and that comfort must be paid for with suffering somewhere down the line. It sounds like this. Nothing good lasts. Things always go wrong eventually. You have to be realistic. Don't get your hopes up. Who do you think you are? That's not how things work in the real world. People like us don't get to have that. You have to fight for everything worth having. Read those sentences again, not as external statements someone made to you, but as internal sentences, the kind your own mind generates during moments of uncertainty or ambition. Familiar? That familiarity is not wisdom. That is not experience teaching you to be cautious. That is the mass mind running its program through the machinery of your private thoughts, disguised as your own voice, using your own language, citing your own history. The infection is complete when the host can no longer distinguish between their genuine perception and the transmitted program. Most people reached that point before they were 10 years old. Here is the specific mechanism that keeps the infection active in adult life, the one that makes it so difficult to override even when a person intellectually understands they are running limiting beliefs. The subconscious does not care about intellectual understanding. You can understand completely, with full logical clarity, with genuine insight, that your scarcity beliefs are not objectively true. You can know, in the analytical department of your mind, that there is no actual law of physics limiting your income, your health, your relationships, or your capacity for a different kind of life. And the programming will continue operating exactly as before. Because the subconscious does not receive instructions from the intellect. It receives impressions from repetition, emotion, and dominant mental frequency. And the years of accumulated repetition, the thousands of fear-saturated thoughts, the daily emotional confirmation of limitation, the unbroken chain of experiencing life through a scarcity lens, have carved the program so deep into the subconscious architecture that a single moment of intellectual clarity barely registers. This is the trap that destroys most self-improvement efforts. A person reads the right book, attends the right seminar, intellectually adopts the correct framework, and then wonders why nothing changes. They blame their discipline. They blame their consistency. They decide they simply don't have what it takes. What they actually have is a subconscious mind that has not been reached. The new information went into the intellect. The old program is running in the power plant. The gatekeeper approved a new idea at the surface level while the deep architecture remained entirely unchanged. Surface changes in thinking produce surface changes in behavior. Surface changes in behavior produce surface changes in results. To change results at the root, the subconscious programming must be addressed at the level it actually operates. That is not a willpower problem. It is a methodology problem. The mass mind infection also has an external maintenance system, one that operates continuously, in real time, without requiring any conscious participation from the people running it. It is other people's doubt. Every person in your life who is fully infected with mass mind programming is, unconsciously and without malice, transmitting that infection in every conversation you have with them. Every time someone you trust responds to your ambition with concern, to your vision with skepticism, to your certainty with gentle reminders of what could go wrong, they are injecting fear frequency directly into your subconscious. Not because they want you to fail, because they genuinely believe in the frequency they are transmitting. Because from inside their own infection, the fear-based response is the responsible one, the loving one, the realistic one. But the subconscious does not evaluate intent. It processes frequency. And their doubt, delivered with warmth and genuine concern, lands in your operating system with exactly the same destructive effect as malicious sabotage. This is why Shin placed such extraordinary emphasis on silence, on never discussing an unmanifested desire with anyone operating on a fear frequency, not as secrecy for its own sake, as protection of a signal that has not yet solidified enough to withstand contamination. Chapter 9 will cover this in full. For now, understand the principle. The mass mind infection spreads through speech, and it spreads equally well through the speech of people who love you. There is one more layer of the infection that must be named before this chapter closes, because it is the most sophisticated and the most difficult to see. The mass mind disguises fear as virtue. Worry is repackaged as responsibility. Anxiety about the future is repackaged as prudent planning. The relentless mental rehearsal of worst-case scenarios is called being realistic. The chronic low-frequency fear that most people carry as their default operational state is labeled taking life seriously. This repackaging is what makes the infection almost impossible to voluntarily exit. Because if worry is responsibility, then choosing not to worry is irresponsibility. If anxiety is prudent planning, then releasing anxiety is recklessness. If the fear frequency is seriousness, then shifting to a higher frequency becomes, in the logic of the infected mind, a form of denial, of immaturity, of dangerous naivety. The system protects itself by making the cure look like the disease. The person who stops worrying about their debt and starts operating from certainty that it is already resolved is not delusional. They are applying the technology correctly. But from inside the mass mind, they look delusional. And the social pressure to return to appropriate, responsible fear is enormous. Most people cannot sustain the deviation. They cast the burden, as Chapter 7 will describe, and within hours, the social environment and the residual programming have pulled them back to the familiar frequency. Back to worry, back to strategy, back to force. And the miracle, which had already been initiated, quietly dissolves. Understanding the mass mind infection is not meant to produce despair. It is meant to produce clarity. Because here is what the infection is not. It is not you. It is not your nature. It is not evidence of fundamental limitation. It is not proof that your particular circumstances are uniquely resistant to change. It is a program, running in a machine, that was installed without your conscious consent. Programs can be replaced. Machines can be reoperated. The first step is seeing the infection clearly enough to stop mistaking it for reality. To hear the fear frequency voice in your head and recognize it as transmission rather than truth. To notice the moment the mass mind speaks, in your thoughts, through your own mouth, through the concerned voices of people who love you, and to understand precisely what is happening. That recognition is not passive. It is the beginning of the operation. In the next chapter, you will learn the complete architecture of the machine the infection is running in, the 3 departments of the mind, what each one actually does, and the specific mechanical error that virtually every person on the planet is making right now without knowing it. Once you see the architecture clearly, the point of intervention becomes obvious. And intervention is where everything changes. In the next chapter, you'll discover that your mind is not a mystery. It is a 3-department engine. And the catastrophic system failures most people call bad luck are almost always the same mechanical error, made in the same department, for the same reason. Knowing which lever you've been pulling and why it keeps producing the wrong result is the diagnostic shift that makes everything else in this book executable. Chapter 3: The Architecture of the Machine. Stop treating your mind as a cloud. That is the first instruction, not a metaphor, not an opening provocation, a precise operational directive. Because as long as you relate to your own consciousness as a diffuse, mysterious, untouchable fog of thoughts and feelings that cannot be mapped or understood, you cannot operate it intentionally. You can only be operated by it. The establishment loves this. Mysteries cannot be hacked. Clouds cannot be reprogrammed. As long as you believe your mind is fundamentally unknowable, you remain permanently dependent on external authorities, institutions, experts, systems of permission to navigate the reality your own mind is producing. Shin refused that position entirely. She did not approach the human mind as a spiritual mystery to be reverently contemplated. She approached it as an engine to be understood, diagnosed, and correctly operated. She mapped it with the precision of an engineer, identified its departments, named their functions, and described, with uncomfortable accuracy, exactly what happens when those departments are used incorrectly. What she found was not complicated. It was simply unknown. 3 departments. 3 completely different functions. Three completely different relationships to power, limitation, and reality creation. And virtually every person on the planet confusing all three every day with predictably catastrophic results. The first department is the one with all the power. The subconscious mind. In most modern conversations about psychology, the subconscious is treated as a repository, the place where old memories are stored, where childhood wounds live, where repressed emotions accumulate. A basement, passive, historical, something to excavate rather than operate. This understanding is not wrong. It is simply incomplete in a way that costs people everything. Because the subconscious is not primarily a storage facility. It is a manufacturing plant. It is, in Shin's framework, pure electricity, raw, unadulterated, world-bending power. It possesses the capacity to arrange circumstances, collapse distances, open doors that appeared sealed, manifest resources from directions the logical mind could never have predicted or engineered. It is the department of the mind that interfaces directly with what Shin called the fourth dimension, the realm where physical reality is still fluid, still responsive, still available to be shaped before it solidifies into the dense, seemingly fixed circumstances of the third dimension. The subconscious is the most powerful piece of machinery available to a human being. It also has one catastrophic flaw. It is completely blind. Shin described the subconscious as a faithful servant, and she meant both words with absolute precision. Faithful, meaning it executes without deviation, without hesitation, without a single moment of independent judgment. Servant, meaning it takes orders and executes them, but it does not originate them, does not evaluate them, does not protect you from your own instructions. The subconscious has no inductive reasoning. It cannot look at the code you are feeding it and ask whether that is actually what you want. It cannot distinguish between a command issued deliberately and a fear rehearsed obsessively. It processes both with identical precision and identical commitment. When you wake at 3 a.m. rehearsing financial catastrophe, calculating the worst case, feeling the physical weight of debt, flooding your nervous system with the full emotional experience of poverty, the subconscious does not pause to comfort you. It does not analyze whether your fear is statistically justified. It reads the dominant signal you are broadcasting and responds with the only response it has available. Understood. Manufacturing this reality. Stand by. And then, faithfully, precisely, without malice or judgment, it begins arranging circumstances to match the dominant program. The car breaks down on the day rent is due. The client withdraws at the last possible moment. The opportunity that appeared certain collapses for reasons that seem externally caused, but are internally coordinated. Not punishment, not bad luck. Execution. The servant is doing exactly what it was told. Right now, for the vast majority of people reading this, the servant has been given the controls. The unexamined traumas, the mass mind programming, the daily rehearsal of fear and limitation. All of it is sitting at the operational panel, pulling levers, and the subconscious is manufacturing a daily life of crushing limitation with absolute fidelity. It is doing its job perfectly. The problem is the instructions it has been given. The second department is the one most people rely on almost exclusively. The conscious mind. This is the intellect, the reasoning faculty, the part of you that is actively processing these words right now, the cold analyst, the calculator, the part of the mind that deals strictly in what can be physically verified through the five senses. The conscious mind is extraordinarily good at what it was designed to do. It spots patterns. It evaluates risk. It sequences logic. It builds arguments and tests propositions. It is, at its core, a biological survival instrument, evolved over thousands of years to keep the organism from walking off cliffs and into predators. It was built to keep you safe, not to make you miraculous. Here is the mechanical problem with a survival tool running a creation operation. Survival thinking and creation thinking operate on entirely different frequencies. Survival thinking is fundamentally conservative. It evaluates the present situation against the threat model and recommends the action most likely to preserve the current state. Creation thinking requires the ability to operate from a reality that does not yet physically exist, to hold a desired outcome as already certain while the external evidence still shows the opposite. The conscious mind cannot do this without immense, sustained effort, and even then, the effort itself becomes the problem. Because effort at the conscious level generates force, and force, applied against a subconscious program running a fear frequency, does not override the program. It amplifies it. But the more critical issue is what Shin identified as the intellect's role as gatekeeper. The conscious mind stands at the entrance to the subconscious and checks the credentials of every possibility that approaches. And its credentialing system is ruthless. Only what is consistent with existing experience, existing logic, and existing evidence is permitted entry. Everything else, every solution that arrives from an unexpected direction, every opportunity that defies the current circumstances, every miracle that has no logical precedent, is turned away at the door. Denied, not because it isn't real, because it doesn't match the model. When the gatekeeper has gone rogue, when the intellect has decided, through years of mass mind conditioning, that limitation is the realistic expectation and abundance is fantasy, it does not just fail to create miracles. It actively prevents them. It intercepts every signal the third department is trying to transmit and either blocks it entirely or distorts it beyond recognition. The gatekeeper, operating on fear, becomes the architect of its own cage. The third department is the one the establishment worked hardest to hide. The superconscious mind. Within the superconscious, Shin called it variously the higher self, the divine design, the fourth-dimensional blueprint. There exists a flawless, uncorrupted model of your existence. Not as a vague aspiration or a hoped-for future, but as a concurrent frequency. A parallel broadcast running right now, superimposed over your current physical reality, containing the precise coordinates of every problem already solved, every limitation already dissolved, every desire already manifested. The mountain of debt, paid in full. The failing health, fully restored. The broken relationship, completely harmonious. Not as future possibilities, as current mathematical coordinates in a dimension that precedes physical reality. The superconscious is constantly attempting to transmit these coordinates to the conscious and subconscious departments. It is always broadcasting the solution. It is always trying to deliver the miracle. But the gatekeeper keeps blocking the signal. The intellect, faithfully protecting you from everything that doesn't match its threat model, intercepts the transmission and refuses it entry. The solution that arrives from an unexpected direction is dismissed as unrealistic. The intuitive instruction that bypasses logic is overridden by analysis. The internal certainty that a problem is already resolved, that unmistakable fourth-dimensional knowing that precedes physical evidence, is labeled as dangerous self-deception and immediately suppressed. The three departments of the machine exist in a state of almost permanent civil war. The superconscious transmitting solutions, the gatekeeper blocking them, the subconscious manufacturing whatever frequency program manages to get through, which, in most people's lives, is predominantly fear. This is not a design flaw. The machine was not built this way. This is a malfunction, produced by the mass mind infection, maintained by unconscious operation, and entirely correctable once the architecture is understood. Here is the diagnostic summary. Read it carefully because it describes, with high precision, what is actually happening beneath every chronic limitation in your life. The subconscious has infinite power and zero judgment. It executes whatever program it is fed. Right now, it is being fed the fear frequency of the mass mind. Through your unexamined thoughts, your rehearsed anxieties, your chronic worry, and it is faithfully manufacturing circumstances that match. The conscious intellect has analytical capability and zero access to the fourth dimension. It was designed for survival, not creation. It is currently acting as a rogue gatekeeper, blocking every miraculous solution the superconscious is trying to deliver because those solutions don't match its threat-based model of reality. The superconscious has the complete solution to every problem you currently face. It is broadcasting right now. The signal is being blocked. The entire malfunction comes down to one mechanical error, repeated in different forms across every area of life. The wrong department is running the operation. The intellect, the survival tool, the three-dimensional calculator, has appointed itself the god of your reality. And until it is bypassed, the solutions available in the fourth dimension cannot reach the subconscious that has the power to manufacture them. Bypassing the gatekeeper is not a violent operation. It does not require destroying the intellect or pretending logic is useless. It requires a specific protocol, a precise sequence of mental operations that slip past the firewall, deliver the correct program directly to the power plant, and allow the superconscious signal to reach the subconscious without the gatekeeper's interference. That protocol is what the rest of this book is built around. Before the next chapter dismantles the most popular method people use to attempt this bypass, and explains exactly why that method doesn't just fail, but actively makes things worse, understand one thing clearly. The problem has never been your capability, your intelligence, your work ethic, your deservingness. The problem has been mechanical. A misfiring gatekeeper blocking a perfect signal from reaching an infinitely powerful engine. The machine works. You simply haven't been shown how to run it. In the next chapter, you'll confront the single most expensive mistake in the entire self-help industry. The method that millions of people are using right now with complete sincerity and devastating results. Gritted teeth affirmations. Forced visualization. Willpower applied as a battering ram against the subconscious. If you have ever tried to force a reality shift and watched the situation worsen instead, this chapter will explain precisely why, and why the failure was never your fault. Chapter 4. Why forcing it destroys it. You have done everything right. You found the right teacher, the right system, the right words. You woke up early. You sat with your journal and wrote the affirmations with genuine intention. You visualized the outcome with real emotional investment. You repeated the process with discipline and consistency for weeks, sometimes months, and you felt, genuinely felt, that this time would be different. And then the situation got worse. Not marginally worse. Actively, specifically, almost personally worse, as if the universe had observed your effort and responded with targeted opposition. The debt that was supposed to dissolve doubled. The relationship you were affirming into harmony shattered. The opportunity you had been visualizing as certain evaporated at the last possible moment. You blamed yourself, your consistency, your belief, the depth of your faith. You decided the technology worked, just not for you. That other people could manifest miracles, but something in your specific wiring prevented access. This conclusion is wrong. The technology works. The problem was never your sincerity. The problem was the tool you were using to deploy it. And that tool, applied with genuine desperation against a fear-saturated subconscious, does not just fail to produce miracles. It produces the precise opposite. To understand why, you need to return to the architecture established in Chapter 3, specifically to the one principle about the subconscious that most teachers gloss over because it makes their methods inconvenient. The subconscious does not understand words. It understands vibration. It does not process the semantic content of your affirmations, the logical meaning of the sentence you are repeating. It processes the dominant emotional frequency underneath the sentence, the current of feeling that is running beneath the words while the words are being spoken. This distinction destroys the entire mainstream manifestation industry in one move. When you stand in front of a mirror, staring at an empty bank account statement, and repeat, "I am abundant, I am prosperous, wealth flows to me easily and freely," what is the dominant emotional frequency underneath those words? Terror. Not because you are weak, not because you lack faith, but because the physical evidence directly in front of you, the number on the account, the pile of bills, the approaching deadline, is activating a nervous system that is wired, through years of mass mind conditioning, to respond to financial threat with maximum fear. Your words say abundance. Your nervous system broadcasts catastrophe. The subconscious receives the broadcast, not the words. And the faithful servant, processing the dominant signal with its characteristic precision and total absence of judgment, responds with the only response available to it. Understood. Catastrophe confirmed. Manufacturing circumstances to match. The affirmation made things worse. Not despite your sincerity. Because of it. Because the more sincerely you engaged with the practice from a position of desperate need, the more intensely you activated the fear frequency underneath it. The more precisely the subconscious executed the fear program. This is what Shin called mental violence. The crude, heavy hammer of personal will striking the delicate machinery of the subconscious. And every strike sends a shock wave through the system that amplifies the existing damage. There is a specific mechanical event that occurs when personal will attempts to force a reality shift against a fear-saturated subconscious. Shin identified it. Modern neuroscience has since confirmed it through entirely different methodology. She called it a catastrophic short circuit. When you attempt to overlay a new reality program onto a subconscious already running a fear program at full voltage, when you press the accelerator to the floor while the emergency brake is engaged, two contradictory signals collide inside the same operating system simultaneously. The subconscious receives, "I am abundant," vibrating at the frequency of desperate scarcity. It receives, "I am healthy," transmitted from a body flooded with anxiety about illness. It receives, "This is already solved," delivered from a mind that is simultaneously strategizing the problem in exhausting detail. The contradiction does not produce a merged signal. It produces friction. And friction in the subconscious machinery generates what Shin called adverse appearances, a specific, observable pattern of external deterioration that follows failed forcing attempts with almost mechanical reliability. The situation doesn't just stay the same. It actively worsens. The job that was shaky becomes the job that is lost. The relationship that was strained becomes the relationship that breaks. The debt that was manageable becomes the debt that multiplies. Each deterioration arrives with its own set of logical, external explanations, the economy, the timing, the other person's decisions, that make it impossible to recognize as the output of an internal system malfunction. But the pattern is consistent across every case where force was applied against fear. Push against the third dimension with third-dimensional tools, and the third dimension pushes back with equal force. Coerce the universe, and the universe responds with more of whatever frequency you were broadcasting when you tried to coerce it. The mainstream self-help industry has built an empire on the precise method that produces this result. Understand why, and you will never be manipulated by it again. The forcing method, visualization, affirmation, willpower, hustle, feels powerful. It feels like agency. It feels like the appropriate response to a problem because it involves maximum engagement, maximum effort, maximum commitment of personal resources. In a culture that worships effort as virtue, a method that demands more effort is always going to feel more legitimate than a method that demands less. A method that says work harder, want it more, push further, believe with greater intensity. That method will always outsell a method that says stop fighting, release the force, withdraw the resistance. The first method matches the mass mind programming. It confirms the fundamental belief that winning requires struggle. It asks you to do more of what you were already doing, which is both comfortable in its familiarity and completely self-defeating in its results. The second method, Shin's method, violates every instinct the mass mind has installed. It asks you to do something that feels, from inside the fear frequency, genuinely insane. It asks you to stop trying. Not to give up, not to collapse into passivity, but to stop applying force, to withdraw the effort that is generating the friction that is cementing the problem in place. This is the doorway to the law of non-resistance, which the next chapter will cover in full operational detail. But before you step through that doorway, one more mechanical truth needs to be established clearly, because without it, non-resistance is misunderstood as surrender, and surrender produces despair rather than miracles. Here is the truth about the forcing method that nobody in the self-help industry wants you to know. The reason it fails is not a flaw in you. It is a flaw in the physics. You cannot build a new reality from a frequency of desperation. Not because you lack willpower or discipline or the right visualization technique or sufficient belief, but because desperation is a frequency, and the subconscious, which manufactures reality from frequency rather than from intention, will always produce circumstances that match the broadcast signal, regardless of what the words above that signal say. Desperation produces more circumstances that justify desperation. That is not poetic justice or karmic punishment. It is mechanics. The only way to break the cycle is to change the frequency, not through force applied at the conscious level, because force, as you now understand, amplifies the fear underneath it, but through a specific operation that addresses the subconscious directly, bypasses the rogue gatekeeper, and opens the channel to the superconscious blueprint that has already solved everything the intellect is exhausting itself trying to fix. That operation begins with a principle so counterintuitive that most people reject it on first contact. The way to destroy the problem is to agree with it. Not to accept defeat, not to surrender your desire, but to stop feeding the problem the one resource that keeps it structurally intact: your resistance. What that means, mechanically, precisely, operationally, is the subject of the next chapter, and it is, without question, the most important idea in this book. In the next chapter, you'll encounter the most controversial, most suppressed, and most misunderstood principle in Florence Scovel Shinn's entire body of work, the law that defies every instinct the mass mind has built into you, violates every rule of conventional problem-solving, and produces results that look, from the outside, like spontaneous miracles. What you resist persists. What you withdraw from collapses. The physics of this are exact. The application is learnable, and once understood at the level of mechanics rather than philosophy, it becomes the single most powerful tool available to a human mind operating in a resistant world. Chapter 5. The Law of Non-Resistance. Look at the problem directly, not away from it, not through the soft filter of forced optimism or the practiced detachment of someone performing non-attachment. Look at it clearly: the debt, the diagnosis, the deteriorating relationship, the stalled career, the situation that has resisted every strategy you have applied to it, and understand one thing with complete precision. Every ounce of energy you have directed toward fighting it has been feeding it. Not metaphorically, mechanically. The problem does not exist independently of your resistance to it. It is not a fixed, solid, third-dimensional object that would stand regardless of your internal response. It is a structure, and like every structure, it requires a foundation to remain standing. The foundation of every persistent problem in your life is not circumstance. It is not bad luck. It is not the economy or other people's decisions or the particular cruelty of your timing. The foundation is your fear. Remove the fear, not through suppression, not through force, but through a specific operational withdrawal of energy, and the structure has nothing to stand on. This is the law of non-resistance. And it is the most suppressed, most misunderstood, most counterintuitive piece of technology in this entire transmission. The first thing to establish is what non-resistance is not, because the mass mind, upon hearing the instruction to stop fighting, will immediately produce one of two distorted interpretations, and both of them lead away from the miracle rather than toward it. The first distortion is passivity. The mass mind hears stop fighting and translates it as accept defeat. It concludes that non-resistance means lying down, abandoning desire, pretending the problem doesn't matter. This interpretation feels safe to the mass mind because it converts a powerful operational protocol into a form of spiritual resignation, something that sounds noble but produces nothing. Non-resistance is not resignation. It is not pretending. It is not the soft collapse of someone who has given up and is calling it enlightenment. The second distortion is denial. The mass mind here stops fighting and translates it as pretend the problem isn't real. Force a smile over the fear. Perform contentment. Manufacture a surface calm that has no operational depth while the subconscious continues broadcasting terror underneath. This is worse than outright resistance because it adds a layer of internal dishonesty to the existing frequency conflict. The subconscious, receiving a surface signal of manufactured peace over a deep signal of unaddressed fear, produces a short circuit that generates adverse appearances faster than either state alone. Non-resistance is neither of these things. Non-resistance is a precise, active, deliberate withdrawal of energy from the problem's foundation, executed not from defeat, but from a position of supreme, calculated confidence. Shin described it as spiritual indifference. The stance of someone who has looked at the enemy and quietly, completely, without drama or performance, refused to be moved. To understand why this works at the mechanical level, return to the physics established in Chapter 3. The subconscious manufactures reality from dominant frequency. Whatever signal it receives most consistently, most intensely, most repetitively, that is the program it runs. That is the reality it builds. When a problem is present and you are resisting it, strategizing against it, worrying about it, calculating its implications, rehearsing its worst-case outcomes, you are broadcasting the problem's frequency at maximum intensity. You are pointing a spotlight of concentrated mental and emotional energy directly at the obstacle and flooding your subconscious with the single, most powerful signal available. This is real. This is permanent. This requires everything I have. The subconscious receives that broadcast and does exactly what it was built to do. It locks the program in place. It arranges circumstances that confirm the signal. It manufactures the experience of a permanent, intractable obstacle because that is precisely what it was told exists. Your resistance is not fighting the problem. Your resistance is the problem's power supply. Cut the power supply and the structure begins to collapse. This is not philosophy. This is the same physics that governs every energy system. A fire without oxygen cannot sustain combustion. A structure without a foundation cannot maintain its form. A program without a continuous input signal cannot run indefinitely. The moment you genuinely withdraw your energy, your fear, your resistance, your desperate forcing effort, the problem loses its operational foundation. And in the absence of that foundation, the superconscious signal, which has been broadcasting the solution continuously, finally has a clear channel to reach the subconscious power plant. The miracle is not created in that moment. It was already created. It was simply blocked. Non-resistance removes the block. Shin described the specific internal state of non-resistance with a phrase that sounds simple and is in practice extraordinarily demanding. None of these things move me. For words, absolute in their scope, requiring the complete internal stillness of someone who has genuinely released the problem, not suppressed it, not performed release while privately clutching it, but actually, operationally, handed it to a department with higher clearance and stepped back from the controls. That state is not achieved through willpower. Willpower, as Chapter 4 established, is a forcing mechanism, and force activates the fear frequency it is trying to override. You cannot will yourself into non-resistance because the act of willing is itself resistance applied at a different angle. Non-resistance is achieved through understanding. Specifically, through understanding the physics clearly enough that the fear loses its grip at the structural level. When you genuinely comprehend, not intellectually, but operationally, that your resistance is the problem's foundation, that your worry is its power source, that your desperate forcing effort is the precise mechanism keeping the obstacle in place, the energy begins to withdraw naturally. Not because you forced it to stop, because it lost its purpose. A mind that truly understands that fighting the fire with gasoline produces more fire does not need to force itself to put down the gasoline. The understanding is sufficient. This is why this book exists in the sequence it does. Each chapter has been preparing the ground for this moment. The mass mind infection had to be named before non-resistance could be understood, because without that naming, releasing fear looks like irresponsibility. The architecture of the machine had to be mapped before the law of non-resistance could be applied, because without that map, withdrawal looks like surrender rather than strategic redirection of power. Now the ground is prepared. Here is the practice of non-resistance in its most operational form. When the problem presents itself, when the fear arrives, when the urge to strategize, to force, to fight rises in the chest, do not suppress it. Do not perform calm over the top of the activation. Look at the problem directly and ask one precise question. What am I feeding right now? Not philosophically, mechanically. What frequency am I currently broadcasting? What program am I currently downloading into the subconscious? What foundation am I currently providing for this structure? That question interrupts the automatic resistance pattern. Not permanently, not in one application, but enough to create a gap. And in that gap, a choice becomes available that was not available inside the automatic reaction. The choice to withdraw. Not to pretend the problem isn't there. Not to force a different emotion over the current one. Simply to stop feeding the current frequency. To observe the fear without activating it. To see the obstacle without energizing it. To hold the problem in awareness with the complete internal stillness of someone who knows, at the level of mechanics, not hope, that their withdrawal of energy is the most powerful action available. Shin described this as being like psychological jujitsu. The master who wins not by matching the opponent's force, but by redirecting it. Using the enemy's momentum against itself, finding the precise angle where non-engagement produces more power than maximum engagement ever could. The problem expected your resistance. It was built for your resistance. It has been sustained by your resistance. When the resistance stops, the problem encounters something it has no mechanism for handling. Stillness. There is a warning attached to this chapter that cannot be omitted, because it describes a specific danger that arises the moment non-resistance is genuinely achieved, a danger that Shin flagged with absolute severity and that most teachers of her work fail to address adequately. When you stop resisting, you create a vacuum. The mental and emotional space that was previously occupied by fear, strategy, forcing, and resistance suddenly becomes empty. An empty space, in an operating system still partially running the mass mind program, does not stay empty for long. The mass mind will rush to fill it. Within hours, sometimes within minutes, of achieving genuine non-resistance, the old program reasserts itself. The fear comes back, often louder than before, because the nervous system interprets the stillness as dangerous inaction and responds with amplified urgency. The intellect, suddenly free from the exhaustion of forcing, regains enough energy to produce a new and more sophisticated set of reasons why the problem requires immediate attention. And if there is nothing to anchor the vacuum, no specific protocol to hold the space that non-resistance created, the miracle is lost before it can materialize. This is not a failure of the law. It is a failure of incomplete application. Non-resistance is not the complete protocol. It is the critical first operation in a two-part sequence. The vacuum must be filled deliberately, precisely, and immediately, with a specific transfer operation that moves the weight of the problem from the department that cannot handle it to the department that has already solved it. That transfer operation has a name. Shin called it casting the burden. And it is the subject of Chapter 7, the most practically important chapter in this book. But before you arrive there, Chapter 6 must establish the mechanics of what actually fills the vacuum correctly. What the polarity switch is, how it works at the level of energy rather than intention, and why the shift from fear frequency to faith frequency is not a change in what you believe, but a change in the electrical direction of what you are already broadcasting at full power. The game is not won by the strong. Strength, in the mass mind definition, force applied relentlessly against an obstacle until it yields, is not a winning strategy in a universe that matches your frequency rather than rewards your effort. The game is won by the still. Not the passive, not the resigned, not the defeated. The still, those who have withdrawn energy from the problem's foundation with such complete, deliberate, mechanically precise calm that the obstacle has nothing left to stand on. That stillness is not a personality trait. It is a trained operational state. And you are learning how to build it. In the next chapter, you'll discover that fear and faith are not opposites. They are the same electrical current running in different directions. The voltage you have been using to power your nightmares is the same voltage available to power your miracles. The switch is not about believing differently. It is about redirecting what is already fully charged and already running in the exact direction that the superconscious blueprint requires. Chapter 6. The Polarity Switch. You already have the power. That is not an affirmation. That is the mechanical truth that this chapter exists to establish beyond any remaining doubt. The voltage running through your system right now, the raw electrical current of your dominant mental and emotional frequency, is not weak, not insufficient, not requiring amplification before it can produce results. It is fully charged. It has always been fully charged. The problem has never been insufficient power. The problem has been direction. The same current that has been faithfully manufacturing your limitations, your recurring obstacles, your persistent cycles of lack and stagnation. That exact current, redirected, is the only power source required to manufacture the miracle. You are not starting from zero. You are flipping a switch. Shin made an observation so precise that it deserves to be read slowly, more than once, until it settles below the intellectual layer into the operational understanding that actually changes behavior. Fear and faith are not opposites. They are the same electrical current flowing in opposite directions. Think about what this means mechanically. Fear is not the absence of power. Fear is power, massive, concentrated, emotionally intense mental and emotional energy, aimed directly at the outcome you do not want. Every hour spent in genuine, activated fear is an hour of full voltage transmission. The subconscious receives it with complete fidelity and manufactures circumstances accordingly. The person consumed by fear of bankruptcy is not someone who lacks mental power. They are someone with extraordinary mental power applied at maximum intensity in precisely the wrong direction. Faith, in Shin's framework, not as religious belief, but as operational frequency, is that same current reversed, the same voltage, the same intensity, the same subconscious receptivity and manufacturing capacity, simply aimed at the outcome that exists in the superconscious blueprint rather than the outcome that exists in the mass mind's threat model. This realization carries an implication that most people miss entirely on first contact. The person who has spent years in chronic fear, who has been broadcasting at maximum intensity in the wrong direction for a decade, is not further from the miracle than someone who has been neutral and uninvested. They are, in a specific mechanical sense, closer. Because the power is already on. The voltage is already high. The subconscious is already receiving the signal at full strength and manufacturing accordingly. All that is required is the switch. The switch is not a decision made in the intellect. This distinction matters enormously because the intellect, the rogue gatekeeper from Chapter 3, will immediately attempt to co-opt this concept and convert it into another forcing operation. It will say, "I understand now. I simply need to choose to feel faith instead of fear. I will decide to believe. I will select the correct emotion and apply it." And it will fail. Because the subconscious does not respond to intellectual decisions about feeling. It responds to actual feeling. And the intellect cannot manufacture genuine emotional frequency through logical instruction any more than it can instruct the heart to beat differently through conscious command. You cannot think your way into faith. You cannot decide your way into a frequency shift. What you can do, and what this chapter is designed to make possible, is understand the mechanics of the current electrical state so completely that the shift begins to occur naturally, from the inside, without force. Here is what that understanding requires. The fear frequency is always, at its core, a statement about the present. It says, what is real right now is insufficient, threatening, and permanent. The empty account is real. The diagnosis is real. The broken situation is real. And the subconscious, receiving this broadcast about present reality, locks that present reality in place with characteristic faithfulness. The faith frequency is always, at its core, a statement about a different present. Not about the future, not about what you hope will eventually happen, about what is already complete in the dimension that precedes physical manifestation, what Shin called the fourth dimension, the realm of the superconscious blueprint where the solution exists as a current mathematical coordinate, not a future possibility. This is why genuine faith does not feel like hoping. It does not have the emotional quality of wishful anticipation, of waiting for something that might arrive. Genuine faith, the operational version Shin was describing, feels like recognition, like remembering something that was always true, like the specific internal settling that comes from knowing the outcome rather than wanting it. That feeling is the polarity switch. Not manufactured, recognized. And the pathway to recognition runs directly through the architecture of the machine. When you understand that the superconscious blueprint contains the solution as a present reality, not metaphorically, not as spiritual comfort, but as actual fourth-dimensional fact, the faith frequency becomes accessible not through effort, but through comprehension. The miracle is already done. You are simply aligning with a frequency that already exists. There is a practical technique Shin used repeatedly with the people she worked with, those facing genuine, acute, material crises, not abstract spiritual development, to initiate the polarity switch when fear had reached maximum intensity. She called it working from the end. It is not visualization in the conventional sense. Conventional visualization asks you to imagine the desired outcome as a future event, to see it happening, to feel the future moment of achievement. This approach, as Chapter 4 established, almost always activates the awareness of the gap between present reality and desired future, which floods the subconscious with the fear frequency that gap produces. Working from the end is different. It asks you to operate from within the completed reality, not to watch it from outside as a future event, but to inhabit it as a present fact, to access the specific quality of inner knowing that belongs to someone for whom the problem is already resolved. Not the excitement of anticipated resolution, the quiet, settled, unremarkable normalcy of someone living in a reality where the issue no longer exists. That internal state, the specific frequency of already done rather than hopefully will be, is what the subconscious receives as instruction, and it is what triggers the manufacturing process in the correct direction. The difference between the two states is subtle but absolute. It is the difference between I am going to be well and I am well, between the money is coming and it is done, between wanting and knowing. Wanting broadcasts lack, knowing broadcasts completion. The subconscious manufactures whatever it receives. Here is where the honest difficulty of this chapter must be addressed directly. The polarity switch is not a technique that can be applied once, cleanly, and held indefinitely through willpower. The fear frequency has been running for years, in most cases decades. It has deep subconscious grooves, neural pathways carved by repetition into the architecture of the operating system. It has the full weight of the mass mind broadcasting in the same direction, continuously, from every screen and conversation and culturally transmitted belief you encounter in a given day. The faith frequency is newer, lighter in the subconscious, less reinforced, more vulnerable to disruption by exactly the kind of external evidence that makes the fear look justified, the bank statement, the doctor's report, the behavior of other people. This is why Chapter 8, The Bridge of Faith, exists as its own chapter. Because the gap between the polarity switch being made and the physical evidence catching up is the most dangerous interval in the entire process. The interval where most people lose the frequency they just found. For now, understand one operational truth that makes holding the switch more achievable than it appears. You do not need to maintain the faith frequency for the entire duration of the time lag. You need to maintain it more than the fear frequency. You need the faith signal to be the dominant broadcast, not the exclusive one, not a perfectly sustained transmission without any interference, but the stronger signal, the one the subconscious receives most consistently. That is achievable, not through perfection, through practice, through return, through the repeated, non-punitive act of noticing when the fear frequency has reasserted itself, recognizing it as the old program running its familiar pattern and redirecting without drama. Each redirection is a repetition. Each repetition deepens the groove of the new program. Each deepening makes the next redirection come faster, require less effort, feel more natural. The subconscious learns from repetition. You are giving it new data. There is one final element of the polarity switch that completes this chapter's operational framework and connects directly to the protocol that follows in Chapter 7. The switch cannot be fully stabilized at the level of internal frequency alone. This is not a limitation of the technology. It is a characteristic of the machine. The conscious mind, even when genuinely aligned with the faith frequency, is working against the residual fear programming stored in the subconscious. The new signal and the old program are running in the same system simultaneously, and without a specific transfer operation that formally moves the weight from the wrong department to the right one, the old program will reassert itself with predictable consistency. The polarity switch creates the electrical condition for the miracle. Casting the burden, the formal protocol of Chapter 7, locks it in place. Together, they form a complete two-part operation. Neither is fully effective without the other. The switch without the casting produces a frequency shift that dissipates. The casting without the switch produces a ritual performed over an unchanged electrical foundation. Both are required, in sequence, with understanding at each step. The first part is now complete. The current is redirected. The switch has been thrown. In the next chapter, you'll receive the most practical, specific, immediately executable protocol in this entire book. The exact mechanical operation designed for transferring the full weight of any problem from the department that cannot solve it to the department that already has. This is not a concept. It is a sequence. And when executed correctly, with the specific language, the specific internal state, and the specific release that distinguishes genuine transfer from mere description, it produces a physical shift in the nervous system that you will feel in your body before the external evidence has moved a single millimeter. Chapter 7. Casting the burden. You are not going to pray. You are going to delegate. That distinction is not semantic. It is the precise mechanical difference between a ritual performed with desperate hope and an operational protocol executed with the cold confidence of someone who understands the architecture of the machine they are operating. Prayer, in the conventional sense most people practice it, is a petition, a request directed upward from a position of acknowledged insufficiency. It carries the emotional frequency of someone who does not have what they need and is asking a separate, external authority to provide it, which means it broadcasts, at the subconscious level, exactly the frequency that manufactures more insufficiency. Delegation is different. Delegation is the formal transfer of a task from a department that lacks the capacity to execute it to a department with full authority and complete capability. It is not asking. It is not hoping. It is the administrative act of a person who understands clearly which department handles which function and who has the operational intelligence to stop using the wrong one. You are not petitioning the universe. You are transferring the file. Shin called this protocol casting the burden. The language comes from a specific understanding of what burden carrying actually does to the operating system of the mind. The conscious intellect, The three-dimensional gatekeeper, the survival instrument built to calculate risk and spot danger, was never designed to carry the weight of complex, multi-dimensional human problems. It was not engineered for that load. Its processing capacity operates strictly within the boundaries of what is already physically visible, already logically precedent, already calculable from existing evidence. A problem that exceeds those boundaries, a financial situation that requires resources currently invisible, a health outcome that contradicts current medical evidence, a relational dynamic that requires transformation beyond what either party currently appears capable of, is categorically outside the intellect's jurisdiction. When the intellect attempts to carry that load anyway, when it accepts the weight of the unsolvable and begins applying its limited, three-dimensional toolkit with increasing desperation, it does not produce solutions. It produces breakdown, stress, disease. The specific physical and psychological deterioration that comes from running a system at continuous maximum capacity on a problem it was never built to solve. You have felt this. Everyone has felt this. The 3 a.m. ceiling stare. The circular thinking that visits the same set of variables again and again without arriving anywhere new. The exhausted, grinding mental effort that feels like work but produces nothing except more evidence that the situation is intractable. That is the intellect trying to lift a freight train with a bicycle. The bicycle is not defective. It simply has a different function. Casting the burden is the act of putting the freight train down. The protocol has 3 steps. Each one is distinct. Each one is necessary. And the failure of most people who attempt this operation occurs at a specific point in the sequence, a failure that Chapter 8 will address in full, but that must be named here so you understand what complete execution actually requires. Step 1. Identification. Look at the situation directly and make one honest declaration, not a dramatic admission of defeat. A precise, strategic acknowledgement of jurisdictional error. My intellect has completely failed to solve this. Not because the solution doesn't exist, because the solution exists in a dimension my intellect cannot access. This step is not humiliation. It is diagnostic clarity. The surgeon who recognizes that a condition is outside their specialty and refers to the correct specialist is not admitting inadequacy. They are demonstrating the highest form of professional intelligence, knowing the boundaries of their own jurisdiction. Your intellect's inability to resolve a fourth-dimensional problem through third-dimensional calculation is not a failure of your intellect. It is a characteristic of the machine operating as designed. The identification step does 2 things simultaneously. It withdraws the false authority of the gatekeeper, removes the intellect's illegitimate claim to be the god of your reality. And it opens the channel to the superconscious by formally acknowledging that a higher capacity department exists and has jurisdiction over this problem. That acknowledgement is not optional. It is the prerequisite for everything that follows. Step 2. The transfer. This is the operational core of the protocol, the moment of actual delegation. Shin provided specific language for this transfer, not as magical words, not as an incantation that works through the syllables themselves, but as a precisely constructed verbal command that performs a specific mechanical function when spoken with genuine internal authority. I cast this burden on the superconscious within, and I go free. The structure of this command is exact and worth examining closely. I cast, active voice, present tense. Not I am trying to cast, not I hope to cast. A completed action. The transfer is happening now, not being requested. This burden, not the problem in its full, frightening specificity, not the debt figure, the diagnosis name, the relationship dynamic. Simply the weight, the burden. The conscious acknowledgement that what is being transferred is not just a situation, but the mental and emotional load the intellect has been carrying incorrectly. On the superconscious within, not upward to an external deity, not outward to an authority beyond yourself. Within, to the department inside the same machine you are already operating, the department with the blueprint, the fourth-dimensional coordinates, the already completed solution. and I go free, the declaration of release. The formal statement that the transfer is complete, the file has changed hands, and the intellect is no longer required to manage this case. When these words are spoken with genuine internal authority, not performed, not repeated mechanically, but executed with the settled certainty of someone completing an administrative function they fully understand, something specific happens in the physical body. The neural pathways of anxiety are interrupted. Not gradually, not through accumulated practice over weeks. In the moment of genuine transfer, the circuit of worry is cut. The body registers the release before the external situation has moved a single degree. A physical settling, a literal reduction in the density of the chest, the loosening of the jaw, the drop in internal urgency, that is not imagined and not manufactured. That physical response is the signal that the transfer has actually occurred rather than merely been described. Step 3. The release. This is where most people fail. Not because they lack sincerity or commitment, because they misunderstand what the release requires. The release is not the act of speaking the words. The words are the mechanism of transfer. The release is the feeling that must accompany and follow the words, the genuine, physical, embodied experience of having put the weight down. Shin was emphatic about this distinction. If you speak the words of casting while still feeling the crushing weight in your chest, if the anxiety remains fully present underneath the verbal command, you have not cast the burden. You have described it. You have performed a ritual without executing the underlying operation. The subconscious does not respond to the ritual. It responds to the frequency. And the frequency of genuine release is unmistakable. It is not the performed piece of someone suppressing fear underneath a spiritual practice. It is the actual, operational lightness of a person who has genuinely transferred a weight to a department with higher capacity and genuinely stepped back from the controls. That lightness is the confirmation. If it is not present, the transfer has not occurred, and the protocol must be revisited, not with more force, not with more desperate repetition, but with deeper understanding of the step that was missed. Usually, the missing element is step 1. The intellect was not fully identified and released from authority before the transfer was attempted. The gatekeeper was still holding the door. Return to identification. Make it complete. Then attempt the transfer again. There is one additional element of this protocol that Shin described as essential and that most adaptations of her work omit entirely. The casting must include the people involved. If the burden is a broken relationship, the protocol is not complete until the other person has been specifically included in the transfer, not with judgment, not with the emotionally loaded specifics of their failures, but with a deliberate, clean release. I cast this person on the superconscious. I release them to their highest good. I release myself to mine. This matters mechanically because resentment, grievance, and the sustained mental energy of blaming another person is a form of resistance. It maintains the energetic cord between you and the problem in the form of the relationship to the other person. The burden cannot be fully cast while that cord remains intact. Non-resistance, from Chapter 5, applies here at its most personal level. The person who wronged you, the situation created by their actions, the ongoing impact of their decisions, all of it must be included in the release or the release is partial. Partial release produces partial results. The protocol requires completion. Now the warning that cannot be omitted. The most dangerous phase of this entire technology begins the moment the transfer is genuinely made. Not before, after. Because after genuine casting, the external physical situation has not yet changed. The bank account is still showing the same number. The medical report still contains the same diagnosis. The relationship is still in the same condition. And the time between the fourth-dimensional completion of the solution and its manifestation in the third-dimensional physical world is what Shin called the bridge of faith. Most people cast the burden at 9 a.m. and take it back by noon. Not through dramatic reversal, through a single act so small and so automatic that they don't recognize it as retrieval until the weight has fully returned. They check. They look at the external evidence to see if the physical situation has yet caught up with the transfer. They look at the bank account. They ask for updates on the situation. They do the small, logical, completely reasonable thing of monitoring current physical reality to assess whether the protocol is working. And the moment they check, the moment they consult the third-dimensional evidence with the implicit question of whether the fourth-dimensional solution has manifested yet, they have taken the burden back. The superconscious, which does not operate on force or persuasion, which does not argue for its authority, which simply executes when the channel is open and steps back, when the channel closes, steps back. And the problem returns, heavier than before. Because the subconscious has now received two conflicting signals in rapid succession, the release and then the retrieval. The dominant frequency of that sequence is not faith. It is the fear that drove the checking. The next chapter exists entirely to address this moment, to prepare you for the bridge, to explain exactly what it will feel like when the external evidence is still showing the old reality while the internal transfer has already been made, and to give you the specific operational capacity to cross that bridge without looking down. For now, understand the casting completely. Identify the jurisdiction error. Execute the transfer with authority. Feel the release in the body as confirmation. And do not retrieve what you have just delegated. The superconscious has the file. Let it work. In the next chapter, you'll face the most brutal interval in the entire miracle protocol, the time lag between the fourth-dimensional completion and the third-dimensional manifestation. The bridge of faith is where every miracle is either protected or destroyed, not by external forces, by the single act of checking the evidence before the evidence has had time to catch up. What it takes to cross that bridge without looking down is not more belief. It is a specific, trained, operational capacity that this chapter will build in you before you need it. Chapter 8. The Bridge of Faith. You cast the burden at 9 a.m. Everything shifted. The weight lifted. The physical settling in the chest that Chapter 7 described as the confirmation of genuine transfer. It was there. Unmistakable. The protocol was executed correctly. The file changed hands. For the first time in months, possibly years, the problem felt genuinely released. Not suppressed. Not performed away. Actually, operationally, handed to the department with the clearance to handle it. By noon you had taken it back. Not through a dramatic reversal of faith. Not through a conscious decision to resume carrying the weight. Through one small, completely automatic, entirely reasonable act. You checked the bank account. It showed the same number. And in the 3 seconds it took to register that number, process its unchanged status, and draw the implicit conclusion that the transfer had not yet produced visible results, the burden was fully retrieved. The worry circuit re-engaged. The intellect, which had been waiting with the patient readiness of a system that knows its user will return, reclaimed the controls. The superconscious stepped back, as it always does, without argument, without resistance, without the slightest effort to hold its authority against a mind that has decided, however briefly and unconsciously, to reclaim the problem. And the weight returned, heavier than before. Because the subconscious had now been given a new and more powerful signal, not just fear, but fear that had been briefly released and then reconfirmed. Fear with fresh evidence that even the protocol doesn't work. Fear reinforced by the specific disappointment of having genuinely tried and found the physical evidence unchanged. That sequence, genuine release followed by fearful retrieval, is the most common pattern in the complete failure of this technology. And it is not caused by insufficient faith, insufficient understanding, or insufficient commitment. It is caused by one thing only: ignorance of the time lag. The time lag is not a flaw in the system. It is a characteristic of the dimension being worked with. In the fourth dimension, in the superconscious blueprint, in the realm where the solution exists as a current mathematical coordinate, the problem is resolved the moment the burden is genuinely cast. There is no delay at that level. The frequency shift is instantaneous. The new program begins executing the moment the old one is genuinely released. But the third dimension, the dense, heavy, physical realm of material circumstances, of bank accounts and medical reports, and the visible behavior of other people, operates on a different timeline. Physical reality does not rearrange itself instantaneously in response to a frequency shift. It moves. It reorganizes. Circumstances that were set in motion by the old frequency complete their arc before the new frequency's results become visible. Between the fourth-dimensional completion and the third-dimensional manifestation, there is a mathematical delay. That delay is the bridge. And the bridge must be crossed blind, without checking the external evidence, without consulting the physical circumstances to assess whether the protocol is producing results, without looking down. This is not irrational. It is operationally precise. Checking the physical evidence during the time lag is not neutral monitoring. It is an active interference with the manufacturing process. Every time you consult third-dimensional reality with the implicit question of whether the fourth-dimensional transfer has manifested yet, you are broadcasting the frequency of doubt. And doubt is the frequency of fear, the same electrical current flowing in the wrong direction. The subconscious, which cannot distinguish between a deliberate fear thought and a monitoring action that produces fear as a byproduct, receives the doubt signal and responds accordingly. It reads the uncertainty as instruction. It manufactures more circumstances that justify the uncertainty. The checking is the sabotage. Shin described the bridge of faith with a severity that bordered on ultimatum. When you worry, you have taken the burden back. Not weakened the transfer, not slowed the process, taken it back, completely. The moment worry re-engages, the moment the intellect resumes its calculation of variables, its rehearsal of worst-case outcomes, its monitoring of external evidence for signs of progress, the file has been retrieved from the superconscious, and the protocol must be restarted. This feels harsh. It is also mechanical truth. The superconscious does not operate on partial delegation. It does not manage a problem you are simultaneously trying to manage. It does not share jurisdiction with a worrying intellect that keeps opening the file to check its contents. The transfer is binary. Either the burden is cast and the superconscious has it, or the burden has been retrieved and the intellect has it back. There is no middle state where you have cast 70% of the burden and retained 30% for monitoring purposes. Understanding this is not meant to produce anxiety about worrying. That would be the most perfect irony available, using the warning about worry to generate more worry. The understanding is meant to produce a very specific operational clarity about what genuine casting requires. It requires the full transfer, not the performed transfer, not the stated transfer followed by covert monitoring. The actual, complete, body-confirmed release of the problem to the department that has already solved it, followed by the sustained, deliberate, sometimes demanding act of living as though the solution is already in motion. Because it is. Here is what the bridge actually feels like, delivered without comfort or softening, because you need to recognize it when it arrives. The bridge is not a peaceful experience. The time lag does not present itself as a gentle waiting period. It presents itself as evidence. Specific, targeted, personally relevant evidence that the protocol failed, that the situation is not resolving, that the physical circumstances are unchanged or worsening, that the people around you are demonstrating no signs of transformation, that the rational assessment of your current material reality strongly suggests that nothing has changed. The external world, during the time lag, looks exactly like it did before the transfer. Sometimes it looks worse. This is the characteristic behavior of Shin's adverse appearances, the phenomenon described in Chapter 4, where the situation actively deteriorates in the interval between genuine frequency shift and physical manifestation. Not because the protocol failed, because the old frequency had momentum, circumstances set in motion before the transfer that must complete their arc before the new frequency's results become visible. The darkness before dawn is not poetic comfort. It is the observable pattern of how physical reality reorganizes in response to a frequency shift. The situation often appears to collapse most completely just before it resolves, because the final adverse appearances are the last output of the old program, not evidence of the new one's failure. Knowing this does not make crossing the bridge easy. It makes it possible. Because the mind that knows what adverse appearances are, that understands them mechanically as the completion of the old program's momentum rather than evidence of the new program's failure, can observe them without retrieving the burden, can look at the worsening evidence and say, with genuine internal calm rather than performed denial, "None of these things move me." That sentence from Chapter 5 arrives here at its fullest operational weight, not as a spiritual slogan, as the precise internal state of someone standing on the bridge, watching the adverse appearances play out below and choosing, deliberately, mechanically, repeatedly, not to look down. There is a specific practice for maintaining the frequency during the time lag that Shin used with consistent results across hundreds of cases. She called it living from the answer. Not praying toward it, not working toward it, living from it. Operating in the present moment from the internal posture of someone for whom the problem has already resolved. Not performing that posture, not pretending, not suppressing awareness of the current physical evidence, but genuinely inhabiting the frequency of completion. This is what it looks like in practice. When the thought of the problem arises, and it will arise many times during the time lag, the response is not to suppress it, not to fight it, not to repeat the casting words mechanically over it. The response is to let the thought surface, acknowledge it without energizing it, and then redirect to the frequency of completion. Not to the future moment of resolution, to the present state of someone living after the resolution. The specific quality of normalcy, of settled ease, of the particular unremarkable calm that belongs to someone for whom this situation is no longer active. That frequency is the anchor. That is what fills the vacuum non-resistance created, what stabilizes the polarity switch, what holds the channel open between the subconscious power plant and the superconscious blueprint during the critical interval when the external evidence is still showing the old reality. The bridge is crossed in that frequency, one moment at a time, not in a single heroic act of sustained belief, but in the repeated, non-punitive, increasingly practiced act of returning to completion every time the fear pulls toward retrieval. The 7-day protocol that Chapter 10 will deliver in full is built on exactly this capacity. 7 days of living from the answer. 7 days of non-retrieval. 7 days of crossing the bridge without checking the external evidence and interpreting its silence as failure. For now, understand the operational truth that makes the bridge crossable. The feeling of the burden returning is not evidence that the casting failed. It is evidence that the intellect is doing what it was built to do, monitoring for threat, checking for danger, attempting to reclaim management of a situation it perceives as unresolved. That attempt is automatic, not malicious. It is the gatekeeper performing its survival function. You are not fighting the gatekeeper. You are simply choosing, each time it reaches for the file, to return the file to the department that has jurisdiction. Calmly, without drama, without self-punishment for the moment of retrieval. You cast it again, and again, as many times as necessary, without keeping score, without measuring faith by the absence of fear, without treating the number of recastings as evidence of insufficient belief. The casting is the practice. Repetition is the mechanism. Each return to the transfer deepens the new program. Each redirection strengthens the faith frequency. Each moment of choosing completion over catastrophe carves a slightly deeper groove in the subconscious architecture that is being rebuilt. The wall will crumble. Not because you forced it, not because you maintained perfect, uninterrupted faith from the moment of casting to the moment of manifestation, but because you return to the transfer more consistently than you return to the worry. Because the faith frequency became the dominant broadcast, not the exclusive one, not a perfectly sustained signal, but the stronger one. The subconscious manufactures from the dominant signal. Give it faith more consistently than fear, and it manufactures from faith. The physics are exact. The timeline is not yours to control. Your jurisdiction is the frequency. Hold it. In the next chapter, you'll discover the final protection mechanism, the one that safeguards the miracle from the most unexpected source of contamination, the people who love you. Silence is not secrecy. Silence is structural integrity. And the precise reason why speaking your miracle before it has solidified into matter is not just inadvisable, but mechanically destructive will be explained in terms that make the silence not feel like withholding, but like the most powerful act of protection available. Chapter 9. The Silence Protocol. You are about to make the most common and most costly mistake in the entire miracle process. Not through fear, not through doubt, not through insufficient faith or incomplete casting or failure to cross the bridge. Through a single, well-intentioned, completely natural impulse that will feel like connection and function like sabotage. You are going to tell someone. Not a stranger. Someone close. Someone whose opinion matters, whose concern feels like care, whose voice carries enough weight in your subconscious to shift the frequency of an unmanifested miracle in less time than it took to build it. You will tell them because the miracle feels real and real things want to be shared. Because the internal shift has been so significant that containing it feels almost physically uncomfortable. Because there is a specific, deeply human need to have the internal experience witnessed, to bring another person into the reality you are inhabiting so it feels more solid, more confirmed, more certain. That impulse is genuine. The instinct behind it is not defective. But the mechanism it activates is. And understanding that mechanism, precisely, operationally, without softening, is what this chapter exists to provide. Shin used a specific image to describe what happens to an unmanifested miracle when it is exposed to premature speech. A steam engine. The steam engine generates power through one principle only, the containment of pressure within a sealed vessel. The steam, heated to maximum intensity inside a closed system, builds to a pressure that can turn wheels, move weight, produce mechanical force far beyond what any human physical effort could generate. The moment you open the valve, the moment you release even a fraction of that contained pressure into the open air, the power dissipates. Not gradually, immediately. The steam that was turning wheels becomes vapor, dissolving into the atmosphere. The vessel that was producing extraordinary force becomes a container of cooling water. Your unmanifested miracle is the pressure inside the vessel. Every word you speak about it before it has solidified into physical matter is an open valve. And here is the mechanical truth that makes this more than metaphor. The people you tell about your miracle are not neutral receptors. They are operating systems. They are running programs. And the program most of them are running, because the mass mind infection described in Chapter 2 is nearly universal, is the fear frequency. When you speak your miracle into that frequency, their subconscious does not hear your certainty. It hears the gap between your current physical reality and your stated desired outcome. It processes that gap through its existing programming and produces the only response its operating system has available. Doubt. Not malicious doubt, concerned doubt, loving doubt. The specific, well-intentioned skepticism of someone who genuinely cares about you and does not want to see you hurt by unrealistic expectations. The have you really thought this through and I just don't want you to be disappointed, and that sounds wonderful, but realistically, delivered with warmth, with care, with the absolute sincerity of someone who believes they are protecting you. Their doubt is real. Their concern is genuine. Their love is not in question. But their frequency is contaminating yours. Here is the precise mechanical sequence of what happens when another person's doubt enters your operating system during the time lag. The doubt arrives not as a logical argument to be evaluated and accepted or rejected. It arrives as a frequency, an emotional transmission that bypasses the conscious evaluation process and lands directly in the subconscious, which cannot distinguish between doubt you generated and doubt that was transmitted by someone else's voice. The subconscious receives the doubt signal. It cross-references the signal against its existing program, the fear frequency that was the default broadcast before the protocol was initiated. It finds a match, and it amplifies. Because the subconscious, faithful servant that it is, treats external confirmation of its existing fear program as instruction to run that program at higher intensity. Someone else's doubt becomes evidence that the fear was justified. The old program, which was losing strength through the repeated castings and frequency redirections of the bridge, finds new power in the external validation. The miracle does not just stall. It reverses. The circumstances that were reorganizing in the direction of the solution begin reorganizing back toward the problem. Not because the superconscious withdrew its blueprint. The blueprint is permanent, always available, never retracted. But because the subconscious is now running the fear program at higher intensity than the faith program, and it manufactures accordingly. One conversation, 15 minutes of concerned, loving, well-intentioned doubt from someone you trust. That is sufficient to collapse a miracle that was days from manifesting. This is not an exaggeration for emphasis. This is the operational reality Shin observed across decades of direct work with people in genuine material crisis. The cases that failed most dramatically were almost never the ones where the person's own faith was insufficient. They were the cases where the person told someone, usually someone close, usually with the best intentions, usually at the moment when the miracle felt most real and the impulse to share it was therefore strongest. The silence protocol is not secrecy in the ordinary sense. Ordinary secrecy is about protecting information from people who might misuse it. The silence protocol is about protecting a frequency from contamination it cannot yet withstand. The miracle, in the interval between fourth-dimensional completion and third-dimensional manifestation, is in a specific state of vulnerability. The faith frequency has been established. The subconscious is receiving the new program. The physical circumstances are reorganizing, but the reorganization is not yet visible. The evidence is not yet present. The miracle exists, fully and completely, at a level below physical perception. At that level, it is fragile. Not because the superconscious blueprint is fragile, that is permanent and incorruptible, but because the subconscious program running the faith frequency is newer, shallower, less reinforced than the fear program it is replacing. It can be overwritten, not by direct attack, but by the introduction of a sufficiently strong counterfrequency delivered through a sufficiently trusted channel. The people closest to you are the most trusted channels in your operating system. Their voices carry the highest subconscious weight. Their doubts land deepest. Their skepticism, delivered with love, penetrates further than any stranger's criticism ever could. This is not a reason to distance yourself from the people who love you. It is a reason to protect them from being used, unknowingly and without malice, as vectors for the mass mind's assault on your frequency. You are not keeping a secret from them. You are keeping a frequency safe until it is strong enough to withstand exposure. Shin was precise about when the silence ends. When the miracle has solidified into matter. Not when it feels close. Not when the signs are promising. Not when the bridge is almost crossed and the external evidence is beginning to shift in encouraging directions. When it is done. When the physical reality has reorganized completely and the evidence is visible, verifiable, and no longer vulnerable to doubt because it no longer requires faith to sustain it. It is fact. At that point, share it freely. Because at that point, other people's doubt cannot retroactively unmake a physical reality that already exists. The steam has already turned the wheels. The vessel has already completed its function. Opening the valve at that stage releases nothing of operational consequence. The sequence is silence during the process, sharing after the completion. Not silence forever. Silence specifically during the interval when the frequency is vulnerable and the evidence is absent. There is one additional dimension of the silence protocol that goes beyond protecting your miracle from other people's frequencies. It also protects it from your own. When you speak about an unmanifested desire, when you describe it, explain it, narrate the journey of working toward it, something specific happens to your internal relationship with it. It begins to feel like a story rather than a reality. The act of narrating moves the miracle from the frequency of present tense completion into the frequency of past tense reporting. The internal state shifts subtly but consequentially. From this is done to this is something I am doing. From the operational certainty of someone living in the completed reality to the narrative distance of someone observing and reporting on a process. That shift is a frequency shift. And frequency shifts, as every chapter of this book has established, produce corresponding shifts in what the subconscious manufactures. The miracle that becomes a story is a miracle that has been moved from the fourth dimension into the intellectual processing of the third, where it becomes subject to evaluation, doubt, timeline anxiety, and the full corrosive apparatus of the gatekeeper's threat assessment. Silence keeps it in the fourth, where it is already done, where it is already complete, where it is waiting, with complete patience and zero urgency, for the third-dimensional physical reality to finish catching up. You now have every component of the protocol. The machine has been mapped. The infection has been named. The architecture of the three departments has been clarified. The forcing method has been exposed. The law of non-resistance has been established. The polarity switch has been explained. The casting protocol has been delivered. The bridge has been described. And now the protection mechanism, the silence that seals the vessel and keeps the pressure building until the wheels turn. Every piece is in place. One chapter remains. Not to add new information, but to deliver the ultimatum that information without execution always requires. You know the machine now. The only remaining question is whether you will operate it. In the final chapter, you'll receive the complete 7-day protocol, the ultimatum that Florence Scovel Shinn issued to every student who reached this point and was still treating the technology as an intellectual exercise. Information without execution is not neutral. It is, in Shinn's precise words, spiritual poison. One impossible situation. 7 consecutive days. The clock resets with every act of worry. The game is not won by the strong. It is won by the still. Chapter 10. Spiritual Aviation. Most people will finish this transmission and do nothing. Not because the material didn't land. Not because the architecture wasn't clear or the protocols weren't specific or the mechanical truth of it didn't resonate somewhere below the level where the intellect does its gatekeeping work. It landed. It resonated. Something in the operating system recognized itself in these pages. The machine, the infection, the faithful servant running the wrong program, the gatekeeper blocking the signal that has been broadcasting the solution continuously. It landed. And then the book will be closed, and the familiar weight of the unresolved situation will reassert itself, and the mass mind, patient, pervasive, entirely without malice, will do what it always does when a genuine threat to its frequency appears. It will wait. It will wait for the intellectual engagement to fade, for the resonance to become memory, for the gap between understanding and execution to do what it always does, widen quietly, incrementally, until the understanding sits in the mind as an interesting idea that was never quite applied. Information without execution is not neutral. Shinn called it spiritual poison. Not a harsh metaphor, a mechanical description. Because a mind that has been shown the machine, shown the precise point of malfunction, shown the exact protocol for correction, and then chooses not to apply it, is not in the same neutral state as a mind that never encountered the information. It is worse off. Because now there is no excuse available. The ignorance defense has been revoked. Every subsequent day of struggle occurs in the presence of knowledge that could have ended the struggle, and that presence, that gap between knowing and doing, generates a specific form of internal corrosion that deepens with every day the protocol remains unexecuted. This is the ultimatum. not delivered gently. Florence Scovel Shinn was not a woman who softened the demands of her technology for the comfort of people who preferred understanding to application. She had watched too many people sit with the knowledge and produce nothing, had seen too clearly the specific tragedy of intellectual agreement without operational execution, had worked with too many genuinely capable people who understood every principle perfectly and applied none of them, who could explain the law of non-resistance with precision and still lie awake at night rehearsing their worst fears with maximum emotional investment. She called the final phase of the work spiritual aviation. The image is exact and worth dwelling on. The aviator does not crawl. The aviator does not engage with the fog of the mass mind at ground level, does not fight through the dense, sticky, fear-saturated atmosphere of the third dimension with third-dimensional tools, exhausting themselves against resistance that multiplies every time it is engaged. The aviator pulls the lever and ascends. Not through denial of the ground. The ground exists. The fog is real. The mass mind is genuinely broadcasting its fear frequency at full power every moment of every day. None of that is pretended away. But the aviator operates in a different atmosphere, above the fog, in the clear air of the fourth dimension where solutions are already visible, where the superconscious blueprint is already transmitting without interference, where the miracle that looks impossible from the ground is simply the current coordinate from altitude. The altitude is the faith frequency. The lever is the casting protocol. The fuel is the sustained, practiced, repeatedly returned to internal state of someone who has genuinely transferred the burden and genuinely refuses to retrieve it. And gravity, the one force that can always bring the aviator back down, is fear. One genuinely entertained fear, one retrieved burden, one moment of consulting the third-dimensional evidence as though it has authority over the fourth-dimensional fact. The altitude collapses. The fog reclaims. And the work of ascending must begin again. This is not a reason to be afraid of fear. That would be the most perfect mechanical irony available, using the warning about gravity to generate more gravity. It is a reason to understand the stakes clearly and execute accordingly. The 7-day protocol is the vehicle. Here it is, without decoration. The 7-day protocol. Day 0, the selection. Before the protocol begins, select one situation. Not a collection of problems, not the full inventory of everything that needs to change. 1. The most impossible one. The one the intellect has most completely failed to resolve. The one that has been present longest, resisted most completely, generated the highest consistent fear voltage. That one. The reason for selecting the most impossible situation rather than the most manageable is specific. The mass mind's credibility depends on its ability to convince you that size determines feasibility. The larger the problem, the more power the fear frequency has, and the more completely the gatekeeper blocks the superconscious signal. Choosing the most impossible situation is a direct assault on that credibility. When a problem of maximum apparent impossibility resolves, the mass mind's foundational claim, that struggle is natural and limitation is real, loses its structural authority permanently. Select the most impossible one. Days 1 through 7, the execution. Each morning, before consulting any external evidence related to the selected situation, before checking accounts, reading reports, asking for updates, reviewing any third-dimensional data about the problem, execute the full casting protocol. Identification. Acknowledge clearly that the intellect has no jurisdiction over this situation's resolution. Transfer. Speak the casting words with genuine internal authority. I cast this burden on the superconscious within, and I go free. Confirmation. Wait for the physical settling in the body. The circuit interruption. The reduction in chest density. Do not proceed until it is present. If it is not present, return to identification and deepen the release of the gatekeeper's authority before attempting the transfer again. Release. Live from the completion. Not toward it. From it. Inhabit the frequency of someone for whom this situation is already resolved. not the performed version. The practiced, returned to, increasingly natural version that deepens with each day of the protocol. The clock rule. If worry re-engages at any point during the 7 days, not a passing thought, but sustained, activated worry that retrieves the burden and resumes the intellect's management of the problem, the clock resets to day 1. Not as punishment, as mechanics. The protocol requires 7 consecutive days of dominant faith frequency, not 7 days of perfect, uninterrupted certainty. 7 days where the faith signal is stronger than the fear signal, where the returns to completion outnumber and outweigh the retrievals. If that condition is broken by sustained worry, the 7-day window has been interrupted and the sequence must restart. This rule will feel harsh. It is precise. The subconscious does not grant partial credit. It runs the dominant program. 7 consecutive days of dominant faith frequency is the minimum repetition required to begin overriding a fear program that has been running, in most cases, for years. The clock rule is not a punishment for human imperfection. It is a calibration mechanism that ensures the protocol is executed at the depth and consistency required to actually work. The silence rule. For the duration of the 7 days, the selected situation is discussed with no one. No exceptions for trusted advisors. No exceptions for people who understand the technology. No exceptions for relationships close enough that the sharing feels safe. No one. The vessel is sealed. The pressure is building. The evidence rule. External evidence related to the selected situation is not consulted as a measure of the protocol's progress. Not because evidence is irrelevant, because consulting it during the time lag, as Chapter 8 established, is an act of retrieval. The moment you check whether the physical reality has caught up with the fourth-dimensional completion, you are broadcasting the frequency of doubt. And doubt is fear flowing in the wrong direction. You already know what the evidence currently shows. It shows the problem. It shows the unchanged, unresolved situation that was present before the protocol began. That evidence is the past program's output. It is not data about the new program's progress. Do not check it. The completion. At the end of the 7 days, or sooner, because the physical manifestation does not require the full 7 days and may arrive before the protocol is complete, something in the third-dimensional physical reality will shift. Not always dramatically. Sometimes the shift is quiet. A call that wasn't expected. A resource that appears from a direction the intellect could not have predicted or engineered. A circumstance that changes without any direct action on your part, that reorganizes in the direction of resolution in a way that looks, from outside the protocol, like coincidence or luck or fortunate timing. From inside the protocol, it looks like exactly what it is. The superconscious delivering the coordinates it has been broadcasting since before the problem appeared to exist. Closing, the final decree. This transmission is complete. The buried blueprint has been excavated. The machine has been mapped in full. The infection has been named, its mechanism exposed, its maintenance system identified. The architecture of the 3 departments, the blind power plant, the rogue gatekeeper, the superconscious that has already solved everything, is clear. The law of non-resistance has been delivered not as philosophy, but as physics. The polarity switch has been explained as an electrical reality rather than a motivational concept. The casting protocol has been provided with its exact sequence, its required internal confirmation, its completion criteria. The bridge has been described without comfort. The silence protocol has been established as structural integrity rather than spiritual secrecy. You have everything. Not as inspiration, as operational knowledge. And operational knowledge has only one function. It must be operated. The hierarchy that buried this technology for a century understood one thing with absolute clarity. Information that is never executed is harmless. An individual who knows the machine but never runs it is no threat to the system that profits from their struggle. The technology only becomes dangerous, truly, systemically dangerous to the structures that depend on your limitation, the moment it is applied. Applied by one person, it changes one life. Applied by many people, it changes something larger. That possibility is why it was buried. That possibility is why you are reading it now. You are standing at the edge of the runway. The machine is explained. The fuel is loaded. The protocols are ready. The coordinates of your miracle exist right now in the superconscious blueprint, broadcasting without interruption, waiting for the channel to be opened long enough and consistently enough for the manufacturing process to complete. The only remaining variable is the lever. You either pull it or you don't. There is no middle position, no partial application, no version of this technology that works at 50% commitment during convenient moments and produces anything other than the adverse appearances that partial application reliably generates. You pull the lever and ascend, or you remain on the ground, in the fog, fighting the third dimension with third-dimensional tools, producing the results that method has always produced. The choice is yours, entirely, irrevocably, without any external authority to make it for you or prevent you from making it correctly. That is, in the end, precisely what they were afraid of. The final decree. Pick the impossible situation. Cast the burden with authority. Cross the bridge without looking down. Seal the vessel. Hold the frequency. 7 days. The game is not won by the strong. The game is won by the still. End of the miracle protocol, the suppressed mental technology that rewires reality without force, struggle, or permission.